Hi everybody and welcome to X the Stress. Today we're speaking to a fantastically interesting person, Willem Pieters. Thank you so much for taking time to come and speak to us. I'm actually going to let Willem do most of his own introduction. He's a counseling psychologist from Cape Town, but has a very interesting background to how he ended up with his special interest in the role of physical activity in mental wellness. So Willem, thank you. And how did you get to this point?
Thanks, Gwen. A little bit about myself. I studied sports science and then studied biokinetics, and I was a biokineticist for 10 years. I think during that time I became more and more interested in mental health, psychology, and so that journey kind of took me on a path where I eventually did my master's in psychology and am now a psychologist.
And with your interest in physical activity in mental wellness, do you find that enters into your practice, or is that just a sort of a personal interest?
Yeah, I think both. Definitely in terms of my own practice, I think just checking in with people around the fundamentals of kind of health and wellness. Are you exercising? What's your quality of sleep like? And are you eating a healthy diet? So I think definitely just looking at not only exercise but physical activity as kind of a cornerstone of mental health.
And these are all basic things that we need to get right.
They are. Also, from a behavioral point of view, I think the ones where people need constant reminding. If I think about physical exercise or physical activity, if there were a drug on the market with the same kind of benefits that exercise has, it would be a multi-million-dollar drug. It would be labelled a miracle drug, yet from an adherence point of view, we still sometimes struggle to take the medicine, as it were.
That's free.
That's free.
But it takes time and investment, and maybe that's the issue. So when we say that this is a wonder drug, this physical activity that has fantastic benefits, what are those benefits? And what is the science to suggest that those are the benefits?
Yeah, I think in terms of benefits, we can look at a couple of different areas. I think the one that many people are familiar with, we kind of call endorphins. But these are really referring to changes in neurochemistry in the brain, looking at neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine. So these are neurotransmitters and also hormones in our body, particularly in our brain, that affect changes in how our brain works. Then there are also benefits in terms of brain structure, particularly in the areas of the prefrontal cortex, in the hypothalamus, and the amygdala, that also promote neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, and these are referring to kind of the connections inside our brain. Then we can look at kind of behavioral benefits of engaging in exercise or physical activity. These might be creating a routine, having some discipline, improvements to our sleep quality, and then also self-efficacy. If I think about adhering to an exercise program that might be difficult, or doing something that is challenging, there are huge benefits to kind of our belief of what it is that we're capable of.
And then, so it's got these amazing benefits. Is that just for generally well people to feel even better? Or is there a role for use of physical activity in people with maybe anxiety, depression, sort of more, I suppose one could say, more severe presentations?
So I think the research is fairly clear here if we're thinking about physical activity as a preventative method or measure, or a treatment modality. And research supports both. We know from a preventative side that people who meet the minimum requirements, minimum physical activity requirements, are less likely to develop mental illnesses, anxiety, depression, etc. But from a treatment perspective, we also know that there's some interesting studies looking at thousands of randomized control trials that show that having or using physical activity as a treatment modality can be as effective as psychotherapy or pharmacology, which are kind of the gold standard treatment for mental illness.
And is that across the board mental illness? I suppose the different presentations would have different efficacies, but my gut feel, I'm not a mental health practitioner at all, but my feeling would probably be that something like anxiety or depression could respond quite well to physical activity.
I think the short answer is yes across the board, with some caveats. I think particularly in the realm of severe pathology that obviously still might require in-hospital treatment, and where physical activity recommendations would then be an adjunct or an add-on. So we don't want to replace kind of our traditional treatment methods with physical activity, but definitely complementary.
Yes.
And then I think in the more mild to moderate side of pathology, the evidence is really strong that physical activity is very beneficial, and in fact as beneficial, like I said, as pharmacotherapy or psychotherapy.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And now you mentioned that adherence to minimal recommendations or minimum physical activity recommendations. So what is that minimum? How much do we have to do before we start seeing benefit?
Yeah, so there are a couple of institutions or organizations across the world that kind of have these minimum guidelines. The American College of Sport and Exercise Medicine, or the Heart Foundation, the World Health Organization. There are nuanced differences in the recommendations. Generally, the recommendations are moderate to vigorous intensity activity, 3 to 4 days a week for at least 20 minutes, or low to moderate intensity activity on at least 5 days of the week for 30 minutes or more. Then if we go one step further, there's also a recommendation for at least 2 days of strength training per week. What's nice to know is that, in fact, from a mental health perspective, there are huge benefits even when we achieve half of those guidelines, with those benefits being the largest for people that are not exercising yet. So huge benefits to people who are not yet exercising, with those benefits going up once we do meet the sort of the minimum guideline.
So in other words, that first step is going to be your most important. That's going to be your biggest benefit from getting from a level of absolutely zero activity to something.
Yeah, and I think that's really encouraging to people who are not yet exercising, is that those benefits are kind of hopefully accessible quite soon or quite early. Also, if we think about when we can kind of expect to see these benefits, there are, again, good research showing that a lot of these benefits are available immediately after exercise, in terms of reduced cortisol levels or our stress hormone, increased arousal or sort of mental awareness. And so even from some of the protocols are kind of 6 seconds bursts of activity at a high intensity with a minute rest in between, doing that 6 times have benefits in terms of mental awareness and things like memory, and then as well as mood. The kind of down the line benefits take a little bit longer once we've kind of stepped into a routine, but it's nice to know that there are short-term benefits accessible quite soon or immediately after exercise, and then those benefits kind of compound over time. for long-term benefits.
Because, I mean, if we're looking at pharmacotherapy, often, I mean, take an antidepressant, for example, that will take at least 2 weeks to show any benefit. So, I mean, how fantastic that we've got exercise that has minimal side effects,
Yeah.
or should I say minimal adverse effects, and you can feel at least some of the benefits immediately.
Pharmacotherapy, I think, is a good comparison, where something like an antidepressant, depending on the particular molecule, like you said, does take a few weeks to have any impact. One of the pathways through which physical activity is beneficial is actually working on those same pathways that antidepressants target. For example, serotonin reuptake. If we look at your anxiolytics, which are prescribed for anxiety, those work immediately inside the body, and so we can think about the anxiolytic effects of exercise also working immediately, again in similar pathways. Yeah.
And this is interesting because I've definitely experienced this in my own life. That, I mean, we've all got problems, we've all got things that stress us or make us anxious, and I just find that if I go for a run, the problems are still there, but I can approach them in a much more rational way, without that feeling of anxiety or fear or anger or whatever it is. It definitely does seem to regulate the emotions around these things. So it's great that it's not just me, and it's not just a figment of my imagination, that there is actually evidence for this.
Yeah, and the evidence is growing. It's a growing body of evidence. I think one of the things that we're also thinking about is, from a cognitive perspective, just creating a bit of space and distance from, like you said, those problems that will still be there. When we remove ourselves from a particular situation by going for exercise or doing some exercise, we can create a bit of space between us and that issue, a bit of perspective, and then also allow ourselves maybe to come up with different creative solutions just by creating some space.
Now, you mentioned a bit earlier in the conversation that the recommendations are to have strength training as well as cardiovascular training. Now, that obviously is from a physical point of view. We know that it's good to cross-train. Is there benefit from a mental health point of view, or is it a case of just do whatever activity you like?
I think, well, maybe this would, again, if we come back to the research, it's quite difficult to standardize these kind of exercise batteries, or the interventions, as it were, and so most of the research is around either aerobic exercise or resistance training, and then also there's a fair body of literature around things like yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi, that kind of class of exercise. Again, what is promising for people to know is that at this stage, it doesn't really look like it matters which one you do, but I would say the most important thing is that you do the one that you enjoy, the one that's accessible to you, rather than worrying too much about what it is exactly that you're going to be doing.
And is there a difference in benefits between indoor exercise, like going to the gym, versus outdoor exercise in an urban area, going for a walk in the park, for example, versus outdoor exercise in a natural environment? Or is that very much, again, what an individual will prefer?
Yeah, I think, there's so many variables. I think in our context, sometimes safety is something that, people take into account. Is it safe for me to be outside or on a certain trail? Maybe there's weather, time of day, it might still be dark. So again, I think it's the one that you're actually going to do,
Right.
The one that you have access to. But I will say, and maybe this is a personal opinion, I think if possible outside is definitely more beneficial. Fresh air, a change of surroundings, just the benefits of seeing natural beauty, and then also some time in the sun. We know too much sun is also not good, but definitely just to get some time in the sun that feel of the sun on your skin, obviously looking after your skin, sunscreen, etc. But yeah, that's hugely complementary.
And then the other question that I have on my mind is, if people are very active during their work, so say, let's take our nurses for example, that are on their feet 12 hours a day, so actually they've done a lot of activity walking up and down a ward, but does that translate to the same mental wellness that leisure physical activity would create, or do they need to try in their crazy schedules try and find some time that they can actually just do physical activity for the joy and for the leisure of it?
Yeah, I think from a physical perspective, obviously if you are in a job that is physically active, you maintain or receive those benefits from being physically active. But I think from a mental health point of view, important that we do an activity which is for leisure. And so I think having or being physically active in your job is definitely a benefit. I think to access some of the more mental health benefits, it would be useful to do something which is really aimed as an end to itself, where the goal is leisure or increase my fitness or enjoy some time outside. Yeah.
And in terms of when to fit this activity into the crazy schedules, is there a time of day that has maximum benefit, or does it really not matter what time of day we exercise?
Again, I think more important that you actually do the activity,
Yeah.
do the exercise. People have different demands on their time or in different seasons of their life. Maybe there are extra demands on your time, parenting or the time of your job. A useful thing to know is that in order to access the benefits, all of the exercise doesn't necessarily have to be in one block. You can kind of space it across the day, maybe three blocks of 10 minutes, for example. Otherwise, in terms of timing, that's a personal preference thing. You might not be the type of person to get up at 5 before everyone else, go to the gym, etc. Or you might be too tired at the end of the day. In terms of timing, the one thing I would add though is to try and avoid really high intensity exercise close to bedtime, just because of that increased arousal can sometimes interfere with our ability to fall asleep.
Ah, right, important. And we know that sleep is equally important.
Yeah.
So I think we've established well that physical activity is good for us from a mental wellness point of view, and we've likened it to medication, that it's got a rapid onset of action, it's been shown to be effective even in very minimal doses. Something is better than nothing. But the other consideration, if we're likening it to a medication, we know that any medication in overdose can be extremely harmful. So is there a possibility to overdose on physical activity? Is there a potential for it to become harmful?
There is definitely. Something that comes to mind is Red S or REDS, also used to be known as the female triad. This is a concern in sport for athletes. And the concern here is really when we are expending more energy than we are able to replace. And so constantly being in a deficit, there are a host of consequences. So we want to be aware of that, and that we are recovering sufficiently. And then in terms of the dose-response relationship, there is kind of a peak. So like you said, something is better than nothing. I would add not to let great be the enemy of good, just for us to do something. But from a mental health perspective, doing more is not always better. And then oftentimes there are other unwanted consequences that might involve our relationships when we start spending too much time, exercising, yeah, so there is definitely, it can be too much.
So all things in moderation.
All things in moderation, but yeah, something is better than nothing.
Great. And then I think the last thing I'd like to ask you is, so hopefully out there, somebody's saying, well, this sounds great. They think that they want to start doing some physical activity, but where do people start? How do they actually get going?
Yeah. What you have available to you, starting at home is great. There's a multitude of videos and sessions you can do from the comfort of your home, just using something like YouTube with minimal equipment. I would also say not to feel like it has to be structured exercise. If we think about physical activity just being a kind of umbrella term for all movement, things like taking the stairs rather than the lift, maybe parking a little bit further away when we go to the mall, washing the car, doing some gardening, that kind of thing. These are easy ways for us to kind of piece together our physical activity requirements. Then I would add to set some sort of goal. Maybe this is not when we start immediately, but to set a goal for, maybe it is how many steps we're going to take today, or to walk around the block, something like that.
Brilliant, brilliant. So one can really incorporate it into daily life and just make very small adjustments,
yeah,
and try and start increasing physical activity.
Yeah, and then build towards a more structured kind of plan where we have those 3 to 5 sessions a week with maybe a more specific outcome. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I think this has really been a fascinating insight. Thank you for your time and for your expertise. And I really hope that you found something that's interesting and enjoyable. And I really hope that there are people out there that take that first step, because remember, that first step is the most beneficial and most important one. If you would like to see more conversations like this, please don't forget to subscribe below, and thank you so much for watching. Cheers, bye.